John sat on the edge of the examination table, tapping his fingers lightly against his knee. The medical room was quiet, with only the soft hum of machines breaking the silence. He looked around, waiting for his usual nurse, Zara, to return with the results of his health checkup. Zara was different from the other nurses he had met. She wasn't human. She belonged to an alien species called the worsens. Despite her tall, slim figure and pale green skin, John had grown used to her over the months. Her gentle care and professionalism made her one of the best medical staff he had ever worked with. But today, something felt off. Zara had been acting strange all morning. Normally, she was calm and focused, but today she seemed distracted. When she had first entered the room, her usual polite greeting felt rushed, and there was a faint tremble in her hands when she checked his vitals. John had noticed the way her eyes kept darting toward him, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. He shook his head, trying to brush off the feeling. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was just having a bad day. Aliens probably had bad days too, right? After a few minutes, Zara returned, holding a tablet with his medical results. Her movements were quicker than usual, and she avoided looking directly at him. "Your health is fine, John," she said in a quiet voice. "Everything is normal." John nodded but couldn't shake the unease building in his chest. "You okay, Zara? You seem different today." Zara stiffened, her eyes widening slightly, but she quickly looked away. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice a little too sharp. "Just a lot on my mind." John frowned. It wasn't like her to act this way. She was always so composed, almost robotic in her manner. But today, there was a tension in the air between them. "If you say so," John muttered, not wanting to push her too much. He stood up, ready to leave, but paused when Zara stepped closer to him, almost too close. Her presence suddenly felt overwhelming, and he could sense the change in her body language. She was breathing faster, her pale skin looked flushed, and her eyes, which were usually calm, now had a strange intensity to them. "Are you sure everything's okay?" John asked again, this time more firmly. He could feel his instincts kicking in. Something wasn't right. Zara hesitated for a moment, then stepped back quickly, as if realizing how close she had gotten. "Yes, I'm fine," she insisted, though her voice wavered. She turned away, trying to compose herself, but John could see the tension in her movements. John didn't know much about the worsens beyond the basics. They were highly advanced and had been working with humans for years, but their biology was still somewhat of a mystery to most people. Maybe this was something related to her alien nature, he thought. Maybe there was something happening that he didn't understand. He decided to let it go for now, but the nagging feeling in his gut remained. As he grabbed his jacket and prepared to leave the room, Zara suddenly spoke again. "John, wait." He turned, surprised by the urgency in her voice. Zara stood there, her hands clenched tightly around the tablet, her expression unreadable. For a moment, it looked like she wanted to say something important, something serious. But then she shook her head and took a deep breath. "It's nothing," she said, forcing a small smile. "Have a good day." John nodded slowly, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer before he walked out of the room. The door closed behind him with a soft click, but the strange feeling stayed with him. Zara's behavior wasn't normal. He knew her well enough to sense that something was wrong. As he walked down the hallway of the medical facility, his mind raced with questions. What was going on with Zara? Why had she been acting so nervous and distant? He couldn't shake the image of her flushed face, and the way she had gotten too close. It was like she was holding something back, something that she didn't want him to know. But what could it be? John sighed, deciding that he would keep an eye on her the next time they met. Maybe it was nothing, just stress from work or something personal. But deep down, he knew this was different. Something about Zara was changing, and he needed to find out what it was before it became a bigger problem. For now, he would stay alert and wait. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of something much stranger. Zara's behavior changes. 750 words. The next day, John returned to the medical facility for his routine checkup, but things didn't feel the same. Zara was there, as usual, but her behavior had shifted even more. From the moment she walked into the room, John could tell something wasn't right. Zara's posture was stiff, and her eyes, which usually carry a calm, professional look, were intense and restless. She barely made eye contact with him. And when she did, it was like she was studying him in a way that made him uncomfortable. "Morning, Zara," John greeted her, trying to keep things normal. "Everything good today?" "Good," she replied quickly, but there was no warmth in her voice. She seemed distracted, as if her mind was elsewhere. She moved around the room, preparing her medical instruments, but her hands were shaking slightly. John noticed this and felt his unease grow. As Zara began her usual routine, checking his vitals, John tried to make conversation. "You seem a bit off lately. Is everything okay with you?" He hoped asking her directly would get some answers. Zara paused for a moment, her hand frozen in midair as she held the scanner over his chest. For a second, it seemed like she might open up, but then she shook her head. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice was too tight, too controlled. John frowned. He wasn't convinced. Something was bothering her. That much was obvious, but she wasn't ready to talk about it. The problem was, her strange behavior was becoming more noticeable. When she finished checking his vitals, she stood too close to him again, almost invading his personal space. John could feel the heat of her body, and it made him tense. She had never acted this way before. Zara had always been professional, keeping a respectful distance while doing her job. Now it felt like she was drawn to him, like she couldn't help but be near him. Her eyes kept flicking over his body, her breath coming quicker than usual. John cleared his throat, trying to break the awkward silence. "You sure you're okay? I mean, you're not sick or something, right?" Zara hesitated before responding, her eyes locking onto his. "I'm not sick, John," she said softly, almost as if she was reassuring herself more than him. But her words didn't match her actions. She stepped even closer, her body language growing more intense, more desperate. John took a step back, needing to create some distance between them. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew it wasn't normal. Zara's behavior was far too erratic. "Maybe you should take a break," John suggested, trying to sound casual. "You've been working hard, right? Everyone needs a rest." Zara's face tightened, and for the first time, John saw something like frustration flash across her features. "I can't take a break," she whispered, her voice low and strained. "I have to stay here. I have to be here." Her words only deepened John's confusion. Why was she acting like this? What was keeping her from taking a step back? His thoughts raced as he tried to figure out what could be going on with her. Was it something to do with her alien biology? Some kind of condition he didn't know about. The longer they stood there, the more tense the situation became. Zara seemed to be struggling with something, like she was fighting an invisible force. Her breathing had grown shallow, and there was a strange energy between them that John couldn't explain. Finally, Zara turned away from him, walking quickly to the other side of the room, as if putting distance between them would help. She placed her hands on the counter, gripping it tightly. John could see the muscles in her arms tensing, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if she was in pain or dealing with something emotional. "I need you to trust me, John," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is something I have to handle. Just trust me." John stared at her, unsure of what to say. He had trusted Zara for months, relying on her for medical care and guidance. But now, he felt like there was something much bigger going on, something she wasn't telling him. And that scared him a little. "Okay," he finally said, his voice cautious. "But if you need help, you can tell me. You don't have to go through whatever this is alone." Zara didn't respond immediately. She stood there, her back to him, her shoulders tense. After a long moment, she nodded, but it felt like a forced gesture, like she wasn't really agreeing with him. As John left the room that day, the uneasy feeling that had been growing inside him only intensified. Zara was hiding something, and whatever it wasn't going to stay hidden for long. The shocking truth. John couldn't shake the strange feeling that had been building ever since Zara's behavior started changing. Something serious was going on, and he needed answers. After his last visit, it became clear that Zara wasn't just having an off day. Her actions were too odd, too intense. The next day, John decided to reach out to someone who might know more about her species, the worsens. The alien species had been working closely with humans for years, but their biology was still a mystery to most people. There were only a few experts who truly understood them, and luckily, John had access to one. He sent a message to Dr. Mara, a leading xenobiologist specializing in Viren physiology. She had worked closely with Zara and her kind before. If anyone could explain what was happening, it would be her. After a tense wait, Dr. Mara responded and agreed to meet with John at the research center. When John arrived, the research center was buzzing with activity. Dr. Mara greeted him with a serious expression. Sensing the urgency of his visit, she led him to a quiet room where they could talk privately. "What's going on with Zara?" John asked, wasting no time. "She's been acting really strange, and I need to know if there's something wrong with her. Is it her health?" Dr. Mara took a deep breath before speaking. "John, from what you've described, Zara is not unwell. But there's something you need to understand about the worsens, something that most humans aren't aware of." John leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "What is it?" Dr. Mara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "The worsens have a unique biological cycle that they go through once every few years. It's known as the mating season. During this time, their bodies and instincts undergo significant changes, much like some species on Earth. The need to find a mate becomes overwhelming for them." John felt the blood drain from his face. "Wait, are you saying Zara's in mating season?" Dr. Mara nodded, her expression grave. "Yes. From what you've told me, it sounds like she's entered the early stages of it. That would explain the changes in her behavior, the nervousness, the intensity, the way she's been acting around you." John stared at her, his mind racing. He had heard about alien species with strange customs and biological cycles, but he never imagined he'd be caught in the middle of something like this. "Why didn't she tell me?" he asked, feeling frustrated. She must have known this was coming, right? Dr. Mara sighed. "It's not that simple. Worsens don't always have control over when their mating season begins. It can happen suddenly, without warning. Zara might not have even realized what was happening until the symptoms started." John ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. "So, what does this mean? What should I do?" Dr. Mara leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "John, this is a sensitive time for Zara. Her instincts are powerful right now, and they're pushing her to act in ways that are beyond her control. She may not fully understand what she's feeling, but her body is reacting. That's why she's been getting closer to you." John swallowed hard, his throat dry. "But I don't know how to handle this. I'm just her patient. I didn't sign up for any of this. I know it's a difficult situation," Dr. Mara said gently. "But right now, the best thing you can do is give her space and be patient. Worsens are highly intelligent beings, and once the mating season passes, Zara will return to her normal self. But until then, you need to be cautious." John sat back, feeling a mix of emotions, shock, confusion, and even a little fear. He had always seen Zara as a professional, someone he trusted with his health. Now, everything felt different, complicated. "What happens if I don't give her space?" John asked, his voice low. Dr. Mara looked at him seriously. "The longer you stay close to her, the more intense her instincts will become. It's possible she'll act on those instincts in ways that neither of you are prepared for. It's best to keep your distance for now." John nodded slowly, though the thought of avoiding Zara made him uneasy. She had become an important part of his routine, and despite the situation, he didn't want to see her suffer through this alone. "Thank you for telling me the truth," John said, standing up. "I'll be careful." As he left the research center, John's mind was buzzing with everything he had learned. Zara was in her species mating season, and the changes he'd seen were only the beginning. He couldn't help but feel concerned, not just for himself, but for Zara too. She was going through something deeply personal and powerful, and neither of them knew how it would end. Things get intense. John spent the next few days trying to follow Dr. Mera's advice, keep his distance from Zara, and give her space. But it was harder than he thought. Every time he returned to the medical facility for his duties, he couldn't help but feel her presence lingering in the air. He told himself he would avoid her, but fate had other plans. On the third day, John received a call for an urgent medical checkup. He was supposed to see someone else, but when he arrived at the medical room, Zara was there. The moment he saw her, John's heart sank. Zara's appearance had changed. Her pale green skin had taken on a soft glow, and her eyes, usually calm, now sparkled with a strange, intense light. She was more distant, but at the same time, there was something magnetic about her, something that pulled him in despite his attempts to stay focused. "John," Zara greeted him, her voice low and softer than usual. There was a new tone in it, something that made his pulse quicken. She seemed more controlled today, but there was still an underlying tension, like a storm waiting to break loose. "Zara, are you sure you're okay?" John asked, his voice more cautious than before. He knew what Dr. Mera had told him, but seeing it with his own eyes made it harder to handle. He didn't want to make things worse by being too close. Zara smiled, but it was a sad, distant smile. "I'm managing," she said. "It's hard to explain." She looked down for a moment, avoiding his gaze. "I know I've been acting strange. I didn't want to worry you." John shook his head. "You don't have to hide it from me. I know what's going on." Dr. Mera explained everything. Zara's eyes widened slightly in surprise, and for a moment, she looked vulnerable. "She told you," she whispered, almost as if she were ashamed. "Yeah," John replied softly. "She told me about the mating season." Zara's cheeks flushed, a sign of embarrassment, and something else John couldn't quite place. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not something I can control, John. I'm trying, but it's getting harder." John took a deep breath, trying to keep himself calm. "I understand, Zara. I'm not blaming you. I just want to know how I can help." Zara looked at him with a mix of gratitude and pain in her eyes. "You can't," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The more you're around me, the worse it gets. I don't want to hurt you, but it's taking all of my strength not to react." John swallowed hard. He knew what she meant, and it made the air between them thick with tension. Zara's species was driven by powerful instincts during mating season, and being close to him was triggering those instincts more than she could handle. He stepped back, trying to give her some space. "Maybe I should leave," he said, though part of him didn't want to. There was something about the way Zara looked at him that made it difficult to walk away. "No," Zara said quickly, her hand reaching out but stopping just before touching him. "Don't leave. I need you to stay." John froze, his mind racing. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the battle between her rational mind and her alien instincts. She wanted him to stay, but he knew it was dangerous for both of them. The tension was unbearable now, thick and electric, like the air before a storm. "Zara, I don't want to make this harder for you," John said gently. "If I stay, it's only going to get worse." Zara bit her lip, clearly struggling with her emotions. "I know," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "But I don't know what to do, John. I've never felt like this before. My body is acting on its own, and I can't stop it." John could feel the heat rising between them, and it was making it harder to think clearly. He wanted to help Zara, to make things easier for her, but he was also keenly aware of how close they were standing now. His heart raced, and every instinct told him to step back, but his feet wouldn't move. Zara's eyes were locked onto his, filled with a longing that made his chest tighten. "John," she whispered, her voice soft and pleading. The air between them was heavy, the intensity of the moment almost unbearable. John's mind screamed for him to walk away, to leave before things went too far. But Zara was right there, close enough to touch, and he could feel the pull between them growing stronger. "I can't do this, Zara," John said, his voice strained. "I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to do something we'll both regret." Zara nodded slowly, her face filled with pain. "I know," she whispered, "but it's not easy. It's getting stronger, John. Every time I see you, it gets harder to fight." John clenched his fists, fighting the urge to move closer. He knew what was happening, but it didn't make it any easier to resist. The intensity between them was like a fire, and it was only a matter of time before it burned out of control. "I need to go," John finally said, forcing himself to turn toward the door. "For both of our sakes." Zara didn't stop him this time. As John walked away, he could feel her eyes on him, the tension still thick in the air. He knew this wasn't over. Things were only going to get more intense from here. Looking for a solution, John couldn't stop thinking about Zara after their last encounter. The intensity of her emotions, the way she struggled to control herself. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He knew he couldn't leave her to face this alone, but he also couldn't stay close to her without making things worse. As he sat in his small quarters later that night, John tried to come up with a solution. He didn't know much about the Viren mating cycle, but there had to be something. Some way to help Zara without pushing her over the edge. He remembered Dr. Mera's words. Give her space, let the season pass. But was that really the only option? The next morning, John decided to meet with Dr. Mera again. He needed more information, something beyond the basic advice she had given him before. When he arrived at the research center, Dr. Mera greeted him with a concerned look. "John, I can tell this situation is weighing on you," she said, motioning for him to sit down. "Is Zara's condition getting worse?" John nodded, rubbing his hands together anxiously. "It's like she's barely holding it together. Every time I'm around her, I can see the struggle in her eyes. I don't want to make things harder for her, but I can't just leave her to deal with this alone." Dr. Mera leaned back in her chair, thinking carefully. "You're right. Leaving her alone isn't the best option. The mating season is a powerful force, but it's also something that can be managed. We just need to find the right approach." John felt a flicker of hope. "So, there's something we can do." "There might be," Dr. Mera said slowly, her mind racing through possibilities. "The Virens have developed certain techniques to help control the intensity of their instincts during this time. It's not foolproof, but it could help Zara regain some control." John's eyes widened. "What kind of techniques? Can I help her with it?" Dr. Mera hesitated. "It's a bit tricky. The techniques involve calming the mind and body through meditation and certain herbs that help ease the physical urges. But there's a catch. The person closest to the Viren during this time can actually make things worse if they're not careful." John frowned. "You mean me being around her might make it harder for her to control herself?" "Exactly," Dr. Mera said with a nod. "Your presence is triggering her instincts. The stronger her connection to you, the harder it will be for her to calm down. But you also might be the one person who can help her if we can get this right." John felt a mix of emotions, relief that there was a solution, but also fear that he might make things worse. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said firmly. "Just tell me how to help her." Dr. Mera stood up and walked over to a small cabinet, pulling out a few vials of brightly colored herbs. "These are Viren calming herbs. If Zara takes these regularly, it should help her manage the physical symptoms of her mating cycle. But the emotional side of things will still be there, and that's where you come in." John took the vials from her, staring at them thoughtfully. "And what do I need to do?" Dr. Mara smiled gently. "You need to be patient. Be there for her, but don't let her instincts take over. It's a delicate balance. You'll have to stay calm, no matter how intense things get." John's heart raced as he thought about what that would mean. Zara's desire for him had already been overwhelming, and it was only getting stronger, but he couldn't let her down. He couldn't walk away. "Is there anything else I should know?" John asked, wanting to be prepared for whatever came next. Dr. Mara nodded. "Yes, you'll need to spend time with Zara, but not in the usual way. Take her somewhere quiet, away from distractions and other people. She needs to feel safe, and that will help her focus on calming her mind. Meditation will be key to helping her regain control." John took a deep breath. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was the only way to help Zara. "Thank you, Dr. Mara. I'll do my best." As John left the research center, the weight of the task ahead settled on his shoulders. He was about to step into a situation that could go very wrong if he wasn't careful. But he knew he couldn't let Zara suffer through this alone. Later that day, John met Zara at a secluded part of the medical facility's gardens. It was a quiet, peaceful spot surrounded by tall trees and blooming flowers. The perfect place for meditation. When Zara arrived, she looked tired but relieved to see him. "John," she began, her voice shaky, but he interrupted her gently. "We're going to get through this," John said firmly, holding up the vials of calming herbs. "I've got a plan, Zara. We just need to work together." Zara looked at the herbs, and then at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and uncertainty. "Thank you," she whispered. Together, they sat down in the quiet garden, and for the first time in days, John felt a glimmer of hope. There was a chance they could control this, together. A close call. The days passed, and John tried to help Zara as best as he could. He followed Dr. Mara's advice, bringing her the calming herbs and spending time with her in the quiet garden. They practiced meditation together, focusing on breathing and calming their minds. At first, it felt awkward, but over time, they found a rhythm that helped both of them. Zara had started to regain some control, but John could see the struggle in her eyes. The mating season was still a powerful force, and even the calming herbs weren't a perfect solution. Every time he looked at her, he felt a deep connection, and he knew she felt it too. One afternoon, as they meditated in the garden, John noticed Zara's breathing became shallow. He opened his eyes to find her looking at him with a mixture of longing and fear. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows across her face, and he could see how conflicted she was. "Zara, focus on your breath," he said gently, trying to keep the atmosphere calm. "Inhale, exhale. You're doing great." But Zara's eyes didn't leave his, and the intensity of her gaze was hard to ignore. "I'm trying, John," she said, her voice strained. "But it's getting harder. I feel so drawn to you." John's heart raced. He knew what she meant. He felt it too. The pull between them had grown stronger with each passing day, and now it was almost overwhelming. "Just keep breathing," he urged, trying to keep his own emotions in check. Suddenly, a loud noise broke their concentration. A group of researchers had come into the garden, laughing and talking loudly. Zara flinched, her body tensing. John could see the change in her expression. The presence of others made her more anxious, and it was clear that she was losing her focus. "Let's move away," John said quickly, standing up and taking her hand. He led her deeper into the garden, away from the noise. They found a small, secluded area surrounded by tall bushes. It was quiet again, but the moment they stopped moving, John felt the energy between them shift. Zara looked up at him, her breath uneven. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this under control," she admitted, her voice shaky. John wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be fine, but he could feel the tension rising in the air. "We just need to focus, Zara. Let's try again." As they sat down, Zara leaned closer to him, her face only inches away. John could see the heat in her eyes, the struggle between her instincts and her rational mind. He could feel his own heart pounding in response. "John," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to fight this anymore." Before he could respond, Zara closed the distance between them. She leaned in, pressing her lips against his. The moment their lips met, a surge of heat rushed through John, and all thoughts of meditation flew out of his mind. Zara pulled back, her eyes wide with shock. "I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, her cheeks turning a bright shade of green. "I shouldn't have." But John was too caught up in the moment to think clearly. He reached out, cupping her face gently. "No, it's okay," he said, his voice low. "I can't deny what I feel for you either." As he leaned in to kiss her again, everything around them seemed to fade away. The world became a blur, and the only thing that mattered was the connection they shared. But just as their lips touched again, a loud rustling from the bushes nearby startled them both. They broke apart, hearts racing, and John looked toward the sound. The researchers had followed them. A few of them were nearby, peering through the bushes, clearly surprised to see them. John's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to handle the situation. "Zara, we need to go," he said urgently, grabbing her hand. She nodded, her expression a mix of embarrassment and fear. Together, they dashed through the garden, trying to avoid the curious eyes of the researchers. As they reached the exit, John glanced back, relieved to see that they hadn't followed too closely. Once they were out in the open, John let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "That was close," he said, still holding Zara's hand tightly. "I can't believe that happened," Zara replied, her voice shaky. "I shouldn't have kissed you. I don't want to ruin our friendship, and I definitely don't want to put you in danger." "It's okay," John said quickly. "I think it just shows how intense things are right now. We're both feeling it, but we have to be careful." Zara nodded, looking down at the ground. "I just didn't know how to control myself. I'm scared, John. What if I can't handle it?" John lifted her chin, making her look him in the eyes. "You're stronger than you think. We'll figure this out together. I'm here for you." Zara smiled faintly, but John could still see the worry in her eyes. They both knew this was just the beginning. The mating season was still in full swing, and they had to be careful not to let things spiral out of control again. As they walked back toward the medical facility, John felt a new sense of determination. They had faced a close call, but they were still in this together. No matter how intense things got, they would find a way to navigate through it. The bond between them was too strong to ignore, and John was willing to fight for it. The calm after the storm. The days that followed the close call felt different for John and Zara. They were still navigating the challenges of the mating season, but after their kiss, everything seemed more intense. John felt a mix of fear and excitement, and Zara was filled with uncertainty about what lay ahead. To help keep things calm, they decided to meet in the quiet garden every afternoon. This place had become their sanctuary, a space where they could meditate and try to find some balance. John brought more of the calming herbs, and they continued to practice the techniques Dr. Mara had taught them. One afternoon, as they sat on the grass, John noticed that Zara seemed more at ease. Her shoulders were less tense, and the anxious look in her eyes had faded slightly. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, handing her a small vial of the calming herbs. "I think I'm starting to manage it better," Zara replied, smiling shyly as she accepted the vial. "The meditation really helps, and so does having you here." John smiled back, feeling warmth spread in his chest. "I'm glad to hear that. Just remember, it's okay to lean on me. We're in this together." Zara looked at him, her eyes bright with gratitude. "Thank you for being so understanding. I know this hasn't been easy for either of us." As they began their meditation, John felt a sense of peace wash over him. They focused on their breaths, inhaling slowly and exhaling together. The gentle rustle of the leaves around them created a soothing backdrop, and for a moment, the outside world faded away. But just as John was starting to feel completely relaxed, a familiar voice broke the silence. "There you are." It was Dr. Mara, and she approached with a smile, her clipboard in hand. "I've been looking for you too." John felt a rush of embarrassment. He wasn't sure how Dr. Mara would react to finding them together after what had happened. Zara looked equally nervous. "Dr. Mara." John greeted her, trying to keep his tone light. "We were just meditating." "Looks like you're doing well," she replied, glancing between them. "I'm glad to see you both together. How have things been?" Zara spoke up, her voice steady. "I think I'm learning to manage my emotions better. The meditation really helps." Dr. Mara nodded approvingly. "That's great to hear. It's essential for a Viren during the mating season, and it's good that you have each other's support." John felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He was relieved that Dr. Mara was supportive of their bond. "We've been working hard to keep things calm," he said. "That's important," Dr. Mara said, her expression turning serious. "But remember, there's still time left in the season. The real challenge may be ahead of you." John and Zara exchanged glances, a mixture of determination and anxiety in their eyes. They both knew the mating season was not over yet, and they had to be cautious. "Do you have any more advice for us?" Zara asked, her voice hopeful. Dr. Mara smiled. "Continue with your meditation, but also focus on connecting emotionally. The more you understand each other's feelings, the easier it will be to manage the physical urges." John nodded, feeling encouraged. "We'll keep working on it." "Thank you for your help, Dr. Mara." As she walked away, John turned to Zara. "What do you think? Are you ready to dive deeper into this connection?" Zara's face turned a shade of green. "I want to, but I'm still a little scared. What if I lose control again?" John reached for her hand, holding it gently. "We'll be careful. We can take it slow and communicate. If things start to feel overwhelming, we can pause. We have to trust each other." Zara took a deep breath, visibly calming herself. "You're right. Let's keep communicating. I don't want to hide my feelings anymore." As the afternoon sun began to set, casting golden light through the trees, John felt a sense of clarity. The connection between him and Zara was growing stronger, and he was ready to explore it further. They took a moment to sit in silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. Then, John spoke. "You know, we're more than just partners during this season. We're friends. I want you to know that I care about you, Zara." Zara looked at him, her eyes wide. "I care about you too, John. More than I can express." Their gaze locked, and in that moment, the air around them seemed to shimmer with unspoken feelings. John leaned closer, their faces inches apart. "Can we take a step further together? Not rushing, but just letting ourselves be." Zara nodded, her expression softening. "Yes, let's do that." As they sat close, the warmth of their connection enveloped them. John felt the energy between them shift, and this time, it felt safe. They leaned in, their lips meeting softly. It was a gentle kiss, filled with warmth and understanding, unlike the impulsive kiss they had shared before. When they pulled back, Zara looked relieved and happy. "That felt nice." "Yeah, it really did," John replied, a smile spreading across his face. "I think we're on the right path." With the mating season still in full swing, John and Zara knew there would be challenges ahead. But in that moment, sitting together in the garden, they felt ready to face whatever came next. They had found their calm after the storm, and together, they would navigate the uncharted waters of their deepening bond.